Hello, welcome to Africa Talks. I'm Carol Pineau. I'm your guest host today. Before we get started, let me introduce myself. I'm a journalist and have reported on Africa for major media for more than 20 years, including postings in Nairobi covering the 12 East African nations and in Eritrea. But then I became tired of endlessly telling Africa's story in terms of wars and famines. And since then, I produced documentaries, Africa Open for Business and others, and focused on telling a different and more accurate and balanced narrative on Africa. And so it is with great pleasure that I am moderating today's discussion on the Horn of Africa, the quest for reality-driven politics. Wow, that conjures up a lot of questions. We have some amazing guests today. Wasi Tesfa, who is an Ethiopian human rights advocate and social media activist. Hassan Omar, a Somali community leader and expert on Horn of Africa politics. Michael Ralph, a professor at New York University. Oluwagbemiga, though we call him Benga, Desylva, who is a graduate lecturer at George Mason University. Let's start by talking a little bit about your work, because you each bring really different things to our discussion. So, Wasi, if I can start with you, can you just tell us about the work that you're doing?
Okay, so I'll just talk about the work that I'm doing about this, the political situation right now in Ethiopia, because I am a human rights activist, like I said, and I'm very much involved in a lot of different things. So right now, what I am working on is really trying to change the narrative, this narrative that is out there in the West about Ethiopia, about the TPLF and what's happening on the ground in Ethiopia. So that's what I'm doing right now. That's what I'm focused on right now. And I do this with a group. It's called GLEAN, Global Ethiopian Advocacy Network, Nexus, Nexus. And so I'm a founding member of that group.
Great. Hassan, tell us about your work.
I work with a non-profit organization, and I'm the head of Somali community here in Midwest. I work with the Somali community, and also I've been following what's going on in Horn of Africa, especially in Somalia, Ethiopia, and Eritrea, that region. And every day I see somebody came from there, share with us current situation and how things going. So even though I am living in America and I've been living here for so long, even I live in DC area for 9 years before I moved down here, and I'm right now in Columbus, Ohio. So every day I live with, actually in that region I'm here. So I follow all events. So that's what I'm doing. But right now I'm helping the new Americans, not only Somali, but all immigrant groups who are in this state.
That's great. Michael, tell us about your work.
I teach at New York University in the Department of Social and Cultural Analysis and the School of Medicine. And my research deals with citizenship and sovereignty, forensics, debt, incarceration in the US, but I've also worked extensively in Senegal and in Eritrea.
And you lead a study abroad trip.
Oh yeah, I also lead a study abroad program in Eritrea. I've taught a course at New York's Abu Dhabi campus, and on 2 occasions I've taken students from the Abu Dhabi campus to Eritrea for research and learning experiences.
Yes, so we are a bit of competitors, because and I have done a study abroad trip for George Mason, so which is great. The more the merrier, isn't it? Right. So Benga, please tell us about your work.
Yeah, I am currently working on my PhD dissertation, and I'm looking at the whole idea of peace building. What makes peace building effective? How do you define effective peace building interventions? How do we understand the cultural differences between the global south and the global north? And how do we understand the critical role that culture plays in all of these things? And of course, in every narrative, there is always that aspect of culture that is ingrained, woven into it like a fabric. So what I'm interested in is to understand critical piece of these cultures and find ways by which we can parse these differences, bridge these gaps, this assumed perceived gap, in such a way that then makes our intervention worth it as per the way locals perceive interventions, and even the way locals perceive us. So I'm working on that, and I have Eritrea as one of my study sites, and two other countries like that. Yeah.
That's fabulous. All right, so let's dive in. Let's start with what is happening on the ground in Ethiopia's Tigray region. Depending on your news source, the TPLF, the Tigrayan People's Liberation Front, who had been the ruling party under Prime Minister Meles, is either on its last legs with just a few stragglers left, or there's still a real fighting force that Prime Minister Abiy had better negotiate quickly with for peace and power sharing. It can't possibly be both. So, Wasi, tell us what we're not getting from the media and what the situation really is.
Yes, so they are stragglers. I'll just start with that. The TPLF is not a force to be contending with, but they did, and I will say they did win this cyber news, cyber warfare that they've been perpetrating. So the thing is this, right now, and I don't know, maybe if I should just go a little bit into how this started. I think what the West...
Wasi, please do, because I think that a lot of our listeners, this is Africa Talks for all of Africa. And one of the things about Africa is one side doesn't always know what's happening on the other side. So I think that this is actually an interesting time to educate everybody on what's happening. So please go into this.
Thank you. So the issue is, I don't know how people are informed about this, but TPLF lost its power about 2.5 years ago. And so before that, they were ruling for about 27 years. It was really total dictatorship, totally focused on the needs of the TPLF through this ethnic federalism, which we call apartheid, separating the people into different, into ethnic homelands. And from there, they ruled. And so, and then we can go back to that if we need to. But what happened is about 2.5 years ago, they were, because of a public uprising, they were pushed out of power. Through a coalition within the government. And ever since then, the TPLF really wanted to come back to power. They could not accept that this has happened. So for the last 2.5 years, they've been doing all kinds of subversive activities throughout Ethiopia, giving weapons to extremists and those kinds of things and training them and what have you. But what triggered this is they attacked the Northern Command, which was based in Tigray. And that is one of the largest, most equipped military branches of the Ethiopian government. And what they did is exactly what the South did at Fort Sumter and why Lincoln had to go to war with the South. I mean, that really was what happened. So, and this is what happened. So when they did that, it was very treacherous, the way they did it. It was well planned out. They did it at all the camps, not just one. They isolated the Tigrayan officers and soldiers and killed the others. They even had trainings for them ahead of time. So this was well planned out. And it was very brutal. Not only did they just kill them, but they, they mutilated the bodies, drove over them with tanks. I mean, just really awful, awful things. So that's what happened. That triggered it.
Wasi, if I can just add something here, because I want people to really understand, this wasn't an active war. This was a clear human rights violation of coming in their sleep and slaughtering them.
Yes.
And I think that when people hear it's the Northern Command, they think, well, they must have been at war. This stuff happens in war. And I think it's really important to note this was not just war.
Yes, exactly. This was not just war. And the interesting thing is throughout this time, TPLF was saying, we're going to do this. I mean, they weren't hiding this. They were, they were having these parades. They were saying that they would call themselves Africa's best army, the better people. They called themselves the Gold of Ethiopia. The rest of the Ethiopian people were lesser than. So, I mean, seriously, that's what TPLF was doing. That's what TPLF was saying. So after they did this, then, and so they were completely surprised. I even had conversations with some of my Tigrayan friends. They said, well, we underestimated the Ethiopian army, you know. And so after that is when, you know, the Ethiopian army came and more or less in a short time, they had everything under control. So these are the facts. But the other thing I do want to say is they did not stop there. I mean, when and that's how you know so much desperate action has taken place, because what they did after that is the TPLF, they blew the airport, I mean, the Aksum airport, the bridges, and all the infrastructure, electricity, and all that. So that was because they had also lost. They needed to create mayhem in the country. And that's what they did. They created mayhem. They released prisoners, convicted 13,000 prisoners, and gave them weapons, weaponized them. And on their way out of Tigray, they created, I think, the worst massacre that has happened in Ethiopia to date. And that was Maikadra. And I just get very emotional about Maikadra because the lowest number you hear about Maikadra is 600, and the highest is 13. So somewhere in between, that many people were massacred and killed. And that's how they went to Sudan. And after they got to Sudan, they get interviewed by human rights activists, by Human Rights Watch, and talk about massacre and victimization. I mean, so you can understand how that is it's just unbelievable what we are hearing in the world today. So
Well,
I mean, we can come back if you go ahead.
There's a lot to unpack there, and
Yes.
a lot of narrative, especially. So,
Yes.
get ready. And Hassan, definitely on between Eritrea and Ethiopia. People then assume that Eritrea is implicated in this and is part of it and to blame for it. And they think that this is just a border war. The other assumption is, of course, they're like brothers. They're exactly the same. So I want you to answer to those. You spent a lot of time in Eritrea, a lot of writing and thinking about Eritrea. Are they the same, just like brothers, as they say?
Yeah, well, I think that it's really interesting question about the countries and how they're perceived. I actually often think a lot of this goes back to the moment when Ethiopia received the Nobel Prize in 2019, and at the time, Dr. Abiy was being celebrated for bringing peace and stability to the region. And I think what was most surprising about the prize and the way it was awarded was that it was awarded to Ethiopia alone and Dr. Abiy alone. And this is unusual for this kind of prize because when even South Africa received a Nobel Prize for ending apartheid, Nelson Mandela and F.W. de Klerk shared the prize, because the notion is obviously when you have peace and a kind of peaceful resolution, it involves two parties. And I think that awarding it to Ethiopia and Abiy alone reflected the kind of broader bias in both in U.S. foreign policy and sort of derogatory views of Eritrea, even in the United Nations and the diplomatic community more broadly. And, if anything, Eritrea should have been awarded the award, or at least credited with helping to facilitate the peace. And I think even Dr. Abiy was signaling that he was trying to make amends for sort of 20 years of Ethiopia having disregarded the sort of agreed upon boundaries and things like that,
And as I had agreed to it in 2002.
Exactly. Even the sort of boundaries that they had agreed to. And really the whole peace effort stemmed from Dr. Abiy sort of making an overture to Eritrea, acknowledging sort of the important role of the martyrs and sacrificing for Eritrean victory. And then President Isaias sending a delegation to Ethiopia to sort of gauge the extent of the peace effort. And then finally, the sides came together with the peace agreement. And even Dr. Abiy, one of his addresses, spoke in Tigrinya to sort of praise the sacrifice of Eritrean martyrs, which was deliberate because during the imperial period, Ethiopia had outlawed even the Tigrinya language, when in the efforts to colonize Eritrea. And so all that to say, I think we have to evaluate this conflict in the context of this sort of imperial history and colonial history of Ethiopia having colonized Eritrea, and also a systematic effort by the U.S., and other members of the diplomatic community to discredit the Eritrean liberation struggle in the years following, and to present Ethiopia as a sort of important U.S. ally and an advocate of peace in the region. There's no history of Ethiopia spreading peace and stability in the region. It's simply the opposite. And even the promise of Dr. Abiy's leadership was really about subduing this kind of ethnic federalism, that Wasi spoke about, right? That was sort of what I think a lot of people thought, that he'd wind up having to do, because precisely there's so much violence and sectarian violence and things like that. And I guess the last thing I'll say is, I guess two things. I think it's important to kind of view the paradigm of the sort of U.S. relationship to the Horn of Africa is similar to the U.S. support of Mubarak in Egypt prior to the Arab Spring. So the Arab Spring kind of revealed that the U.S. will sometimes support a leader that's known within the country as tyrannical, but somehow is seen as spreading what the U.S. is calling peace and stability in the region. And just like the Arab Spring revealed that to be a kind of faulty paradigm, I think, a lot of recent events have revealed that Ethiopia was credited with bringing peace precisely because of a U.S. ally, but that had not, in fact, been the case. And I also think the added dynamic that we'll probably wind up discussing a bit is the role of the Eritrean diaspora in this conflict, in terms of what we were discussing as the kind of TPLF media strategy, so to speak. And I think that often people will go to members of the Eritrean diaspora for input about the conflict or even about living conditions in Eritrea, and assume that what people are saying is accurate. But I think by now, there are parts of the Eritrean diaspora that function sort of like the Cuban diaspora, the kind of anti-Castro Cuban diaspora, or the anti-Chavez Venezuelan diaspora, and are very sort of critical about the regime at home. And their standing in the country is in part based on criticizing and saying derogatory things about the leadership at home, And I think people haven't yet grappled with what role that plays in U.S. foreign policy toward Eritrea. This notion that you have a kind of diasporic constituency that's like venomously opposed to the leadership at home.
That is really well put. And of course, the Eritrean diaspora has two sides to it. There's also this tremendous support, and exactly as you say, the venom. Hassan, certainly the West has treated the issue between Eritrea and Ethiopia as a border war. And it's just about the border, and it's just about Tigray. And even now that we're having this situation in Tigray, it's really just about Tigray. It's not, or just about Ethiopia. It's not. It's about the whole Horn of Africa. And I know it has spread to your country quite badly in many ways. Give us an overview of how this situation with the TPLF has ended up spreading throughout the entire Horn and even beyond.
First, thank you for actually this forum, and I see it's very important, and also I see the experts and advocates and people who have knowledge in the region. Horn of Africa never been easy, really. For last 600 years, there has been a conflict between, people who live in the region, whether they are Somalia, Ethiopia, and Eritrea. Specifically, when I talk about TPLF ruling for last 27 years, one thing that I remember is they invaded actually in Mogadishu, the capital of Somalia, under the militia leadership, and they killed 26,000 Somalis. Also, they forced out over 1 million people, and they labeled every Somali a terrorist. They became a close allies to the United States, and they misled, and really they became the voice of the Horn of African, people. and they gained so many prestige. And I would say that even they took a hostage for American foreign policy on Horn of Africa. And they destroyed the entire structure, even the culture, for everything. They created in Somalia what Somalis are one ethnic group, homogeneous, and they created something that we did not know. They called federalism, based on the clan lines. Even as I'm talking to you today, there has been a disagreement between two states and the federal government. They rejected to participate in the election, as the TPLF had done with the Ethiopian prime minister, and they became a renegade. Those individuals were installed, and they were a puppet for TPLF. And they left really a huge legacy and mess in Somalia. And not only in Somalia, they kept in Eritrean people and Eritrean the country. You remember what had happened. There has been a war, and then they convinced the Western countries to label Eritreans as supporting and harboring the terrorists, in order to discredit and keep that country weak and divided. So that forced the Eritrean people even could not have a basic lives in their own country. It forced so many young people to adventure and die on the high seas to cross, come to Europe to get a better life. So TPLF did not have and do not have any friends the entire Horn of Africa. They were a very small group. You may not remember, maybe you may remember even the Ogaden region, which is the eastern region of Somali ethnic. In 1995 to 2000, they committed atrocities and they killed thousands and thousands. They created and they set up the largest prison system. It's called Ogaden Jail, which is located in Jijiga. Nobody ever questioned, because they say everybody's a terrorist. And then so many people listened. And now you see Somalis and Ethiopian and Eritrea established a new phase of relationship. And we don't have Ethiopian intervention in internal affairs of Somalia. You don't see Somalis intervening inside of Ethiopia. You see Eritrean and Ethiopian have actually created bilateral agreement, which they, based on mutual respect, those countries. And the Horn of Africa is better off without TPLF. And I'm sure that they have a very strong machine propaganda, whether they are social media or individuals who've been here for so long, or maybe some officials, even the United States individuals who have been working. I have to say that I'm American, and I sometimes say, freedom of speech. Maybe, Obama administration, some, officials were very close to them. And now they may try to revive. But one thing I want to tell you, the Horn of Africa has more than 200 million people, and we need a peace and stability. 5 million people cannot impose their own, cannot impose whatever they want on those people, because we inherit from them starvation, wars, conflicts, divisions, and unprecedented, really, they destroyed the hope and the future of the Horn of African people. I would say that they destroyed the hope. They use a psychological warfare to intimidate any individuals who become against to them, anybody who speak out and tell them this is not. Even in Somalia, the leadership, they put 5 generals in Somali region. They created 5 embassies in local, and there are even individuals, and same thing, every region, they create a federalism in Ethiopia, and that based on a clan and tribe. And then these people, it's not easy to be ruled. These people, they need very strong leadership. They need a law in order to be restored. And if every clan get a flag, and every clan get a weapons and arm, how can you unite all those people under one umbrella? That would be very difficult. As a Somali, we've been recovered from civil war. We're trying to, gain again and stand our own feet. But unfortunately, those people destroyed. Since they left, right now, the United States had a direct relationship with Somalia. The Somali is building and rebuilding its own army. They are relying on themselves. We are out there and we're not a terrorist because their terms was way to, they created that problem in Horn of Africa. So what I do believe is right now, I don't think 5 million people can face against 200 million Ethiopians or Eritreans or Somalis. So we have to respect the majority. And also we have to look back what they have done in the past, what they contributed, what we gained from their ruling, for 27 years. To be honest with you, I haven't seen any Somali or saying, regret it, losing the power for TPLF. We are favored for the peace of Horn of Africa. This is a great region. It has a lot of resources. People are very intelligent. We do not need weapons. We need tractors. We need to become farmers. We don't want it to be warriors against one another.
It's interesting. I know a lot of the facts of what you're talking about, but when you talk about it, it's just with such passion that, I feel like I'm learning it all over again. And I think it's important to note that the U.S., the issues you're talking about with U.S. foreign policy happened both under Republicans and Democrats. And this was not one party. And it isn't like, people sort of think, oh, now a new party's in, everything's going to change. Probably not. And I think, as you note, change has to happen from within. It's going to have to be with the region that changes, not forcing.
September 11 was a tragedy, and it became ripple effect. And at that time, I think the United States somehow the foreign policy became a freak, and they have to rush wherever the Islamist is located, and they listen to everybody who wants to take advantage of it. So TPLF realized that this is the time because the Somalis weak and divided. And also, the Bush administration was eager to support. And that's when they invaded in Somalia, when they really made a big mistake. And again, their remnants are creating a chaos, the entire internal affairs in Somalia. Some of them even in Washington, they are, again, we get a president right now whose popularity is 95%. You remember, we've been in civil war, we fought each other, people really, scattered, and all of that, sudden somebody, we elect somebody and everybody, all over the Somalia, even those who live in Ethiopia or Kenya or Djibouti, welcoming him. And again, they see the light. But we have a forces that are against. And one thing that I want to tell you is that the United States I personally worked with American troops.
We're gonna come back to the U.S. A lot of the things that Hassan and in fact that Wasi and Michael are talking about, it's sort of like there's something in the narrative that we're willing to believe about Africa, just sort of, hook, line, and sinker. There's no questioning of it. When something happens, oh, it's those sort of crazy ethnic violence things that happen over there. How much does our preconceived notions, prejudices, and narrative play a part in how much we're ignoring what is really the facts on the ground.
Thank you for the opportunity to be able to contribute my little quarter here. The point is this: we are very likely to reflect the image that to project the image that we have about ourselves. It's very easy for us to transfer that on others. And it's also very difficult for people to accept that, people as individuals, to accept when they're wrong. Now, imagine how it's going to be very difficult for system to believe and to own up to the fact that they're wrong about certain things. So over the years, you've heard and read about the not so good, the negative narratives that pervades, the social media and the internet about a particular country or about a particular region. Let's take, for example, Nigerians. You say that you're a Nigerian. The first thing that anybody thinks is, oh yeah, he's gonna scam me, right? It's not all Nigerians that are scammers. We have Nigerians in American government and things like that. But it's always that negative stories that we take away from any conversation. Because when news break, it's always the negatives that people break when it comes to news. So this has been the case whenever people are talking about Africa. This has been the case whenever people are talking about issues relating to certain regions in Africa. For example, West Africa, you say, oh yeah, the most notorious are Nigerians. But is that the truth? That I don't know. I'm not going to be able to tell you that. But the same way that I don't know, I don't think that anybody should be able to jump into that conclusion to say, yes, this is it. These guys are bad or these guys are terrible, that kind of thing. So, but when systems, infrastructures that are set up to address critical issues of our lives, when they are making fatal mistakes like jumping into conclusions, taking up narratives hook, line, and sinker without kind of assessing it to know whether it is true or not, or you just have that opinion set 30 years ago and you don't think that it's worth looking over it and reviewing that opinion. When systems are set up to not make costly mistakes like this, when they make costly mistakes, then the ripple effect is what you see in the Horn of Africa. So when you're talking about peace building, what does it mean? It's a process. There is no peace building that has to involve a third party. It has to be, we are willing to move forward, then we can invite a third party. Peace building process should not be an initiative of a third individual or a third party asking you to, oh yeah, now it's time for you guys to build peace. No, we have to deal with that. And whatever is happening in Ethiopia right now, it's not new, because Nigeria experienced it, during one of the presidential dispensations just before the last, when a particular region made the country ungovernable for another just because the president at the time was not from the north. So we find situations where countries in the global south have ways of working out their own politics. And it's important for us to understand the party, understand the biases of whoever you are sourcing your information from before you assess it or evaluate it as to be the right or to be the wrong, either way you want to go about it. But I think that the bottom line is this. Even if as professionals, we want to assess a case, we want to assess a conflict situation, what do we do? The first thing you do is assess yourself. Do a self-evaluation. Why are my biases in this issue? And the question is, how many of these intervening systems have asked themselves that question? That is, before you go into the issues between Ethiopia and Eritrea, how much of your time have you committed to self-evaluating, reevaluating yourself and your interests? Because that is also important, because the question of what do I want from this intervention? Is it to perpetuate the trouble or to halt it? Is that what I want? Because if you're not able to answer these questions in a very sincere manner, then you continue to encourage negative media to fuel negative news. You continue to encourage those who are probably making some economic gains from the 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 instabilities in the region. Maybe you're encouraging them, because I think it's important for us to come to terms with the need for us to reevaluate our place in intervention. What is the role that I'm playing here? Do I want it to continue, or do I want this to end? How do I want it to end? Talking about Africa and conflict and then running to Amnesty International shouldn't really be the ideal, because
Has that ever solved anything?
so it hasn't solved anything. And even apart from that, it only sensationalizes the issue. It really sensationalizes the issue. It doesn't beat the reason out of it. It really doesn't do much of that. So I think that culture has to change. Intervention cultures have to change. Perception culture has to change. That's just what I think we need to start thinking about.
You know, it's so true. I mean, as a journalist, I'm supposed to love these reports, but honestly, I've never once heard a government say, oh, they wrote that report about us. I'm going to really have to have a good think about this and change how I do things. So, if anything, it just makes it worse. Wasi, I want to come to you because you said something really interesting before about the cyber war. And I think that people have not really understood. When I lived in Eritrea during the height of the Eritrean Ethiopian War, I always felt like there was this other battlefield that no one ever talked about. It was the narrative battlefield. And frankly, the Eritreans were really losing on that. They often were very quiet and just didn't say anything and said, let our actions show for us. That's not really what happens in a 24-hour news cycle. And their traditional humbleness was ending up with this huge army of propaganda that was coming out, and that's the narrative that has stuck. And it's been to a lot of people's advantage to have that stick. So I would love if you would unpack for us, both historically and now, about this cyber war, because it's definitely gone on cyber.
Yes. So, I mean, what's really interesting is what you talked about, the humility of the Eritreans. That's also kind of the way Ethiopia is. I mean, you don't talk about this. I mean, that's what they're still doing, But the interesting thing about the TPLF is this. They got it right from the get-go. And not only did they get it right, this is not something they just started. This is something they really built. They built it through the education system of their youth. And more importantly, they had the funding to do this. They have billions of dollars that they took out of the country. I mean, there's the Forbes report that says to the tune of 3 to 4 billion a year. That comes almost around to 30 billion or 50 billion, whatever that number is, dollars that they took out of the country. Now, Ethiopia has zero cash right now. I mean, zero. So they had all this money available to them. They have the biggest and the best and the brightest and the most expensive lobbyists in the United States, including the company of the vice president's husband. That's a TPLF lobbyist organization. I mean, he resigned from that, but I just want to show you they are so connected everywhere where there are the more important people. And then also the other thing is they really educated, they have a cadre of young men and women who are launched just to take care of the cyber war. And so what they've been doing after that is they've been changing the narrative. They've been taking things that Boko Haram did and cutting it up and to say this is what happened in Tigray. And they're connected to all these journalists, and they have what I call these mercenary journalists, these 9 or 10 or 12 people, highly paid, because TPLF has all the money available to them. So they are doing all this cyber war. And then the other thing, what is very, what I just can't understand, and I'm very naive, is 2.5 years ago, people were saying, I mean, so not, not maybe not the people that were in government, but journalists and Amnesty and what have you, they were talking about some of the atrocities that this TPLF committed. All of a sudden, that's all gone. That's all gone. And so to me, I mean, they've really been bought and sold. And so that's how I see the cyber wars happening. And then, what's really interesting is, in the past, you had journalists go on the ground and really do the interviews and to find out what's happening. Right now, TPLF says something, maybe they tweeted, and these reputable journalists or media outlets just pick it up and talk about it as if it's true. For instance, to me, the most telling one is the one about Aksum, the bombing of Aksum. If anyone knows Ethiopians, especially the Orthodox Ethiopians are Aksum is a holy place for Ethiopians. It would be crazy if the Ethiopian government went and bombed Aksum. I mean, it would be, it's like bombing Lalibela. These are our holy cities. So that in of itself is inconceivable if you understand the culture and what people do. But what's very interesting is they took these pictures from I don't know where and showed us a few things here and there and said, there's been a massacre in Aksum, there's been a bombing of Aksum. But the next day was the biggest festival of St. Mary of Zion, which is the Church of Aksum, and thousands of people were out there celebrating. The day after a massacre has taken place, you go out in your white Ethiopian outfits and you go celebrating there. No, you don't. And so these are the things that we don't hear, and that people that the reports just leave out. And so that's all I can say about the cyber warfare. But I do want to add one more thing about what Omar said about these ethnic divisions. So, because really, I think the biggest damage TPLF did for Ethiopia is this ethnic federalism. And the interesting thing is when they did ethnic federalism, because before that, okay, there are issues and all that you have, diversity couldn't be celebrated. It's something beautiful. What they did is they totally weaponized it. Now, how did they weaponize it? They went to the Oromo regions, and then they had this statue with a woman's breast cut off. And then they said, this is what the Amara did to you. So they did these kinds of things all over the place. And this is what they've been propagating. And then they deliberately made this linguistic separation of the people, because in the past, okay, Amharic culture was, as a culture, I would say was more dominant because also it was the lingua franca. So now nobody learns Amharic except in Tigray. In Tigray, they learned Amharic. So what this did is people stopped talking to each other. So, and then the other thing, which is really, I think Ethiopia is the only country that has a passport which says which tribe you're from or what race, what you are. You don't just say I'm Ethiopian. You have to say I'm Amara, I'm Somali, I'm this, I'm that. They just force you to do that. So that's
no
what.
idea. Seriously?
What?
Your passport says, your Ethiopian passport says that?
Yes, well, I don't have an Ethiopian passport, but nowadays those that have the Ethiopian passports and IDs, it would say that. It would say you are this and that. And that's a pure TPLF thing, because they only believe they can stay in power through ethnicity, not through any good things and good graces that they would have. And the only way to do that is to keep people divided and to keep their military power strong. And so they managed to do that, and themselves educated and nobody else. So because they're the ones who are educated, they are the ones that you see in the FAO, like Tedros Adhanom. I mean, if you knew all the places that Tigrayans are in, TPLF supported people, they're all in the power. They're the power brokers. They're the power brokers, and that's where you find them. And they are the friends. They're the ones who go to the country clubs, and that's who these people in power would be talking to. And so to come back to that interest, what is the interest of what my friend just said about peace and negotiations and intervention? The West never intervened because they wanted peace or for us to get nicer or better and good lives. They intervened for their own interests. So whoever would be supportive of that, they would support. So they were always interested, supporting of the status quo. And that's why they supported Meles, because he would go to war with Somalia for them, and this one would do that for them. So they would do it. But what's crazy right now, there's no real logical reason for them to support the TPLF, other than these personal relationships that they built through the Obama times and what have you. Because really, it's insane for the US to be supporting TPLF right now, because what they're doing, they're pushing the horn towards China and Russia. That's what they're doing. And people that want to work together. You have Eritrea, Ethiopia, and Somalia wanting to come together, to work together, wanting to have a strong horn of Africa. Thank you.
And we should know that the peace agreement that happened with Ethiopia and Eritrea happened in the complete absence of foreigners.
Exactly.
I thought that was one of the most heartwarming things, to see Isaias and Abby walking along with not one single foreigner with them. And so I think there is really something to that. A couple of things I just want to put in perspective. You said that the Forbes report had said that the Tigray region was pulling out 3 to 4 billion a year.
The TPLF.
But it was 3 to 4 billion a year.
A year, 3 to 4 billion a year, which is half of the national.
Okay. So I want to just put that in perspective.
Yes.
Benga, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I remember long ago reporting in Nigeria after Abacha had died, and people talked about, my God, he stole 5 billion from Nigeria. Total 5 billion. And everyone thought that was the most outrageous thing that had ever happened. And Nigeria is considered, as you said, if you say you're Nigerian, people assume it's corruption.
Yeah.
5 billion and total in all the years that Abacha was in power. And you're saying 3 to 4 billion a year?
3 to 4 billion. It's the Forbes report, which is really too bad. We always have to go to these reports because our reports are not good enough. Ethiopian Human Rights does the investigation. It's not good enough. So you need the other one, so yeah.
And I think that there are just so many things within that to unpack. One thing though that strikes me as you're talking is that it's almost like there's this parallel universe, and it just can't be true. You must be paranoid to think that, oh, it's always, they're here and they're there. And, it almost sounds crazy speak, right?
Yes.
Only then you see it. I remember when I was at VOA and they very proudly said about Eritrea-Ethiopian coverage, well, the Eritrean service hates us and the Ethiopians, or the Ethiopian government hates us and the Eritreans hate us. So we must be saying the right thing. And this is a fallacy that happens in the news, that you think if both sides hate you, you must be saying the truth. Mm-hmm. Whereas it's also possible there's a third story. Mm-hmm. And that's what people aren't understanding. So, and I have seen this, I think, Benga, you've seen this, where, there are people very well placed within think tanks, within universities, within all of the all of these language services at major media throughout the world. You say to them, oh, so you have an Eritrean service. How do you know that they are Eritrean and not Tigrayan? Oh, we know. Like, okay, but even immigration doesn't know. How do you know? So it's a very interesting thing. But Michael, I want to come to you about the Amnesty Report. And if you can give us an overview of what was, what that report is. There are a lot of people who won't have read it, won't be familiar with it. But what were the sort of main points? And there were multiple reports. The human rights, Amnesty, all of these that come out with the reports on Tigray. So bring us up to speed on those.
Sure. I mean, I think it actually builds a lot on what Wasi was saying in the sense that, and I don't know if it's just because of this particular moment when even, I remember one time New York Times was sort of raving about having a few correspondents on the African continent and not recognizing that sort of with 52 countries and, millions of square miles, that this is like a crisis for their journalism to have only a few people reporting on Africa. I don't know if it's just because of the pandemic and there are even fewer journalists on the ground than usual, or just the fact that there's sort of scarcely any effort to substantiate evidence about what's happening in Eritrea, Ethiopia, and the Horn of Africa more broadly. But in particular, I think we've seen like a lot of these alleged atrocities that are just wholly fabricated, false evidence or minimal evidence, and very, very scarce details. I think the most shocking thing to me is how much of it is based on anecdotal evidence. Just sort of someone said this, someone said that, and it's not substantiated. There are a lot of anonymous sourcing and things like that. And I just think that it's been sort of very detrimental. And unfortunately, it's also drawn in a lot of people who are well-intentioned, who care about social justice and fairness and rights, and who couldn't believe that these reports could be mostly based on misinformation or just things that are completely fabricated, So I think the effect of them is that sort of they wind up having these sort of litany of abuses and things that are unsubstantiated, and ultimately sort of create this impression that this, sort of this vast atrocities going on and being overlooked. And I actually think that the language of genocide in particular, that's sort of become part of a lot of the social media campaigns, like genocide in particular, it sort of has a similar effect to what we saw like in the 90s in the US, where anytime someone mentions genocide, it sort of is an automatic rationale for international intervention and really military action, often when people think about African governments as having highly active militaries, it's seen as a sign of corruption. Let's say people invoke Nigeria, they invoke various countries with active militaries, but actually some of the most active military operations in the African continent are quote unquote humanitarian missions and sort of UN sponsored missions that are designed to foster stability and things like that. In fact, I've done a lot of research in Senegal, and the first operation Senegal participated in when it was still the Mali Federation, when Mali was in 1960, when the UN deployed troops to quote unquote foster stability as Patrice Lumumba was being ousted from power in Democratic Republic of the Congo. And so I think what's essentially happening with these reports is that it's sort of listing these atrocities, scant evidence, often misinformation, building up this sort of international audience concerned with atrocities, with genocide, based largely on misinformation, and then creating sort of rationale for outside intervention. And to your point earlier, Carol, too, I think not only is it in many ways happening, the sort of derogatory view of Eritrea or the sort of misinformation about the Horn happens both with Democrats and Republicans. But in fact, you could argue U.S. foreign policy is far more detrimental historically when Democrats have been in power, because that paradigm of treating each region as if there is a good guy that should be defended at all costs and a bunch of bad guys that have to be ousted from power or subdued at all costs is really sort of a liberal theory of geopolitics, either because of opportunism or for various other factors. Republican elected officials have not tended to have that same outlook on foreign policy, but really it's under the guise of spreading democracy and humanitarian intervention that we've seen some of the worst sort of forms of imperial violence in the African continent, and particularly in the Horn of Africa.
Yes.
I'm writing down your good guys, bad guys, geopolitics. This is so crucial, I think, in understanding Africa, because one of the things that happens, I think, is we almost look at Africa from the West as they couldn't possibly have geopolitics. It can't be, these are sort of simplistic, and they couldn't possibly have something as complex as geopolitics. There must just be good guys and bad guys. And so we get it wrong over and over again, which I think is really interesting. I also want to bring up, when you mentioned genocide, this is a word that is tossed around quite a bit. And in fact, there have been 4 genocides in the last century, as I understand, from a technical, the Holocaust, Rwanda, Armenia, and Cambodia. And here we are, like, when something happens, we say genocide, and it's very easy on Africa. Only one of those four is Africa. So let's remember that. But we look at Africa and sort of the littlest thing, we go, oh, that's it. We're so quick to put labels on it, which I think gets us back to the narrative, Benga. And I'd love to hear you talk about the lack of appreciation that there really are complex geopolitics in each of these regions, and that we can't just look at good guys and bad guys. And how does our simplistic narrative make it so we're missing so much?
I think it would be insensitive for me to think that the West do not know that there is geopolitics in Africa. I mean, they were the imperial leaders, right? They colonized this country, so they understood. Especially the Anglophone Africa, was the structure that was in place was pretty much what was adopted, right? You only just subsumed that working system to what was yours, your imperial system, to make it more effective. So there was already a system. So the whole idea of geopolitics not being, not being aware of it, or not being woke enough for it, really doesn't cut it. But that aside, we're talking about the Horn of Africa today. Yes, Horn of Africa is relevant. We're talking about the propaganda machine that's been deployed by one ethnic group against the other or against the country. Yes, that is true. And then we've also read about the Amnesty Report on massacres that did or didn't happen. How about other crisis prone areas like Cameroon? What is the Amnesty International and the media, what are they talking about? The massacres in Cameroon. Why is Ethiopia that important? Why is Cameroon not as important as Ethiopia? Why are we not shifting focus? So the reason why I'm asking this question is because it's so obvious that we can actually see the hypocrisy right there. It's black and white. Why are you interested in this particular region and not the other region? The interest is there. It's just right there, plain and simple, right? The interest. Okay. How do you then want to work your interest to benefit the two or whoever that are the stakeholders that are involved in this? I think that is the important thing that we need to question. For every negative report, there has to be a counter narrative to that, because the bulk of the Amnesty International report is like an individual was met at this particular place and he confirmed an already reported story that an individual had said about this particular thing. During the NSAS protest in Nigeria, we saw videos of massacres. We saw CNN go in there and walk out the timeline. We want to see something like that here too. If you are able to give us something like that, and then, because these are critical questions, you can't just have your CEO sit down in the office and one individual walks in and say, boss, I have an idea. You don't walk in and say you have an idea. You don't walk in and talk about genocide. You don't just write things about mass atrocities. You're supposed to do your fact finding and not just about an individual said something about what someone else said. This is human life that you're playing with, and you're supposed to be the one protecting it. You don't say things like that. So we're supposed to watch what we say, and the media is also supposed to really know whether they want to publish a story or they don't want to publish a story, especially right now that we have, if I want to publish a story, I can always just go start a blog. So we have become so connected and so interconnected to the point where we really need to fact check. Why is it that organizations do their fact checking, facts check properly before they issue out a letter? So why would you not fact check a news item, but just because you want to enjoy the sensation of it, you want to Is what I don't understand is it that they bask in the fact that Africa is burning or some regions in Africa is unstable? Because I still don't understand why I'm gonna feel good listening to terrible news all day in the name of breaking news.
Mhm.
So I think that paradigm needs to shift. Let breaking news be something positive happening. That could also be a breaking news. It doesn't have to be like, yeah, because then the pandemic also hasn't helped because now we are sitting down watching the TVs and watching the screen and staying on Facebook and Instagram, and we keep feeding that cycle that feeds our bestial instinct to just want to. I think that has to stop.
Very well put. Uh, um, Hassan, I want to come to you and talk to you about what you think right now with the situation throughout the Horn, not just in Ethiopia, but throughout the Horn. What do you think the role of the UN and the US should be? Both what it should be and what you think realistically it could be. Because I think those are probably two different things, right?
Absolutely. One thing that I like always to separate is TPLF and Tigray population.
Yes.
I'm a favor for mothers, elderly people, people who need support, and those who are fighting to come back and creating a massive propaganda in order to influence to the United States policymakers, because they have roots already established for last 27 years. I am not aware of how much money they took the country out of, but one thing that I know that they have a free hand to do whatever they want. At the same time, nobody ever checked what they have been doing, whether they're human, abusing the people, plundering the economy, crossing the borders. They were very absolutely, they have kind of a veto the entire region. And one thing that I like to see is I like to see the Horn of Africa to become more stable than it is today. And when we were talking about because sometimes the propaganda and misinformation can create more problems than we have today. I personally know the meaning of intervention. For example, today we have an AMISOM in Somalia. It's a 20,000 troops from African continent are stationed in Mogadishu. Maybe you're American or maybe the other people are not aware of where these things originated from. The Second World War, not First World War, British brought to Somalia. The troop is called, you can check today, African King Rifle, King African Rifle, KINT, rifle. And they came from India and Africa. They came to Somalia and they've been fighting against the Somali liberation armies at that time. Somalia was the first country in Africa ever used an airplane. The British used airplane in 1919 to suppress the rebellion against and fighting for the liberation. We know today they've been in Somalia for 12 years. They are sitting behind, the backs. They don't fight. They stay in Mogadishu. The United States and the United Nations and the European Union give every year over $300 million. I'm not sure. Whereas would be the better to invest the country itself, whether it's reconciliation, whether it's building the military, whether to develop the economy, the local economy. There are so many other suitable programs that could have been done in order to overcome the problems. Because intervention, you remember when the Tigray TPLF, Ethiopian troops invaded Mogadishu, there was no Al-Shabaab. They were not existing. Al-Shabaab was created by the foreign troops who took over the country. We know I was one of the consultants with the American troops. I was with the US Marines, 1992, 93 in Mogadishu. And I remember the United States came with the full force, with a good attention for humanitarian assistance. And be honest with you, without American support, over 2 million would have perished, would have been gone. We have here in America people who survived because of the American intervention. But at the same time, the policy was not equal with the humanitarian, because every country has a culture and been existing for so long. And sometimes you cannot impose on your thoughts or your own culture, or you know what I mean? So it has been very difficult to be ruling those countries. There are not enough resources. People are fighting over the resource. People are fighting over the power. People are fighting based on the pride and clan, or ethnic groups in the region. So if you take a side, then you are losing the rest of the community. So the reason being Africa been suffering for so long, and Horn of Africa is a favor over one group over the other group, because these people are all equal and they need to live. So in Horn of Africa, I think it's very, as I told you, it's over 200 million people, and it's a very strategic location, geopolitics. It has enough resource if it develops. So what they need is a peace. So if you go back to square one and say the TPLF is crying and they are coming to the United States and talking to Congress, Senate, and influence the State Department, then what's going to happen? You are ignoring. There are 5 million, so you are ignoring 195 million people who live in the region, who are already suffering from their hands, who fears if they come back, these people again, what's going to happen next? So I do believe the United States shouldn't pay attention what specific thing, but you have to have a broad, perspective, the entire region. And the only way we can reach is to empower, because unless you empower the government, institution, and empower, economic robust and help the economy and create the peace dialogue among the people, you will never succeed. But if you try to impose the foreign policy, if you listen to somebody who visit there for a couple of days and trying to become an expert, you know what I mean? I know the group is called Sahan. You may have heard about that group, Sahan, and headed by the guy, his name Brighton, Matt Brighton, and they're based on Nairobi. Actually, they are fighting for TPLF. And they also against the Somali people. They are very strong machine. And they are a number of them. I'm not sure how many they are consist of, but always I see there on tweet, they are undermining the Somali peace process. They are undermining the Ethiopian steps, and they are promoting the Tigraya. So what we would like to see in the future, we would like to see those countries already working together, Somalia, Eritrea, and Ethiopia. And this is the region where it has been, so long wars between Somalia and Ethiopia. We don't want any more conflict in the region. We would like to create a peaceful relationship, a mutual respect, economic integration, working together, educate our youth, because we have a bright youth and we are very important to people. But unfortunately, the Ethiopian side or Somalia side, whatever, there has been an influence and there has been so many wars. We lost many lives. We cannot continue. So I believe this is the last leg, but America needs to understand that the Eritreans have a right to exist. You remember they get independent from Ethiopia. And since they left, the TPLF labeled on them as they are helping terrorists. They are against the West. Nobody's against the West. You know, when you help me, I will help you. That's a human nature. If you fight with me, I will fight with you. So we need to help and respect the integrity and the unity of Eritreans. And not, if you suppress, you're trying to fight, you know, if somebody wants to fight against the president, they are targeting the people because people are suffering. He is the last person to survive. So if we put, impose a sanction and keep him, then who's going to suffer? There is no economic development. There is no education. There is no political independence. So the country will shrink, and the society will become desperate. And then tomorrow, whom they're going to blame? And then you have also contested groups. You have a European Union. You have United States right here. You have UK right here. They have a United Nations. You have a neighboring country. And then they call international community, but they don't have a common agenda. So there's hypocrisy. So what we need is to understand is we let the African continent to determine its own destiny. I think that's what we need, to respect the Africans. Not only remember what's going on in Congo, what's going on there, how long they've been suffering, how much resource they get. And they have a United Nations troops out there. What they have done for 30 years, they've been there. Look what happened, you mentioned earlier, Rwanda. So as Africans, actually, we don't have enough leaders who come together and solve the problem and sort out the issue one by one and figure it out. So as a Horn of Africa, this is the first time my father was born in Ogaden region. At that time, when he was born, there was no border. The country was not Ethiopia, was not Somalia. That was under the, even the colonial. There was under British colonial. And now we are living in the United States. I don't have a border. I go to Djibouti, the Somalis. I go the Ogaden region, the Somali. I go Kenya, Somali. But I like all those people to live together and respect. And anybody wants where he lives to stay with peaceful, with, to integrate his neighbors, to respect. Secondly, TPLF, we are not trying to say they are innocent. And we are not saying they are really trying to do something right now good. So just keep in mind, the United States needs to pay attention earlier. Sometimes the United States will call somebody who's, traitors. If somebody, if American guy goes to Russia today, we are not believing that person, but somebody who maybe steal the money from his country comes to this country and we listen to that person. He's becoming against his own country. So all human beings have an equal, I think we are all human beings. We think the same, we have the same feeling. So as an African, we would like Africa to be stable, to be independent, and especially Horn of Africa, Somalia, Eritrea, Ethiopia, Sudan, whoever live right there, they need peace without TPLF leadership.
Listen, one of the great things about this panel is having both people from the Horn and people outside of the Horn to be able to give both perspectives. And Wase and Hassan, you've talked a lot about the TPLF and how pervasive this is. And like I said to you, Wase, that it's easy for outsiders to look at that and say, this must be paranoia. It couldn't be true, but I'd love to get from Michael and Benga outsider views of how you see the TPLF and just how pervasive is it? How, is this the issue? Or is this just one of many, and they're overplaying it, I guess, because that will be the thing that people ask. So, go ahead, whoever wants to first.
I would just say, I think, sadly, it's the sort of discourse of genocide and the TPLF narrative that is going to be the basis for how a lot of people start to understand what's happening these days in Ethiopia, Eritrea, and the Horn of Africa. And I think, as many of the panelists have said, it's especially, I guess, frustrating in the sense that really we're witnessing a moment when, for the first time in many decades, the leadership of Ethiopia, Eritrea, Somalia are sort of working closely together, to foster sort of peace and economic prosperity for the region. So it's kind of especially ironic that people see it as a place plagued by crisis and suffering at this juncture, when in many ways there's a lot to be excited about. Um, I also think that it kind of, to your question, Carol, a very astute question about whether this is like the key issue, I think it plays into just a lot of assumptions that we've been discussing about how people see the region and how people, the kind of character people assign to different countries. And I think one of the more surprising things, is, but I guess in visiting Eritrea, one of the more surprising things is how different it is from the way it's often depicted, to be. So when I took students there, for instance, on multiple occasions, there had been a different way group that went to Ethiopia. And when that group went to Ethiopia, there was a lot of concerns about their safety. They had armed guards, different places, things like that. The groups in Eritrea was the opposite. That it was very calm and peaceful. They could walk around freely and things like that. And obviously, Eritrea is a much smaller country. Ethiopia was a much larger country at the time. There were particular kinds of violence and things raging in Ethiopia. But it was interesting that the experience of the students, and as they discussed with each other, the different groups, was the opposite of what they had anticipated, given that they had heard so much about Eritrea, and they thought of it as a place plagued by violence and instability and suffering, and they just expected that to have that experience, and their experience, it was very different. It was like, they thought it was beautiful, a place of kind of abundance, people were sharing, working collaboratively. They saw a lot of even sort of women in prominent positions in society, whether it's sort of in police forces, in the military, and as cabinet officials, things like that. So there was a lot to be excited about and impressed by, and they felt very safe and comfortable just walking around freely and interacting with people. So I guess I would say that, part of I think what we're all saying is that journalists and experts need more familiarity with the region in person and in their scholarship to be able to understand what's happening. But I would also say for observers, it's important to try to visit the region and gain familiarity with what is happening there, because uh, there's so many people taking advantage of the fact that there are both a lot of sort of ordinary people and also scholars and journalists who have never been to the region and don't know much about it.
And yet that hasn't stopped them from talking about it. So, Thenga, please.
Yeah, I think there is we all have that desire to be different. We have the desire to be good, but there is always a time when, even after we've gotten that which we really seek after, we then lose it. We lose that. We just forget about ourselves. We forget about the purpose. Um, and the reason why I gave that almost not too far-fetched analogy is because we have the capacity to be the best that we can be. And every society grapples with one challenge or another, leadership challenges here and there, educational, structural, and but at the end of the day, the question is, how have we impacted positively? In Ethiopia, we've seen what Ethiopia has been able to do during the leadership of the Tigrayans, as against what has happened now. These are the kind of antecedents that whoever is supporting either party should, whoever is supporting either party should be concerned about. That is, what is the antecedent? What happened in this particular country when these guys were, at the helms of affairs? What is happening? What happened immediately after? And then what is happening now? Because that should give you an insight into whatever the dynamics at play is. That is, if this guy were truly corrupt, they were taken out by a bloodless revolution and practically pushed back to their corner, right? What is expected is, like, you've taken power from a particular hegemony. Then they're not going to let it just slide like that without putting up a fight. Normal international relations idea will give you an insight into that, I would assume. But I don't see the media do that. I don't see the media ask the right questions. Like, what exactly happened when this ethnic group was at the helms of affairs? What happened immediately after? Now we saw the two countries, Eritrea and Ethiopia, coming together, and then the what's it called? The Nobel happened, and we thought we were doing fine before all of this happened. This same playbook that happened during the Jonathan Boko Haram trouble, pretty much the same thing. And we don't see all of those massacres. We don't. As a matter of fact, what is the Human Rights Watch? What is it reporting about the northern region of Nigeria? What is it reporting about Boko Haram? What has been the report, and what has it mobilized people to do? Right? What kind of mobilization has happened during the EndSARS protest, when Nigerian youth went all out and everybody took on the baton, trying to really call out the systemic policing of everyone? So I think it's important for us to just understand that we know how to tell our stories. But even if you want to understand what our stories is, try and read the history written by people, of same experience. I don't want to read a history book written by a white man about a country in Africa. Please, let me write my own story the way I want to write it. And then because it helps that way. Then I learn about you, you learn about me. There is no way I can learn about me from you. It's not possible. So we need to put in the right pegs in the right hole.
So, Wasi, this issue of how much the destabilization has spread throughout the Horn, it's not even just the Horn. You're looking at Sudan, you're looking at Kenya, and, sort of the whole region.
Yes. Of course, one of the major issues that are rising right now is the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam, the GERD, which is going to be the largest dam, which is, it's completely built almost in Africa. And so, of course, that kind of worries countries like Egypt. And then, the Nile water doesn't just go to Egypt, but then some of it is also being sold to Israel and all kinds of things. So there's different kind of relationships coming around that dam. And so one of the issues around the dam is, I really think more than anything, it's the political control of it, because when you talk about the dam really does not stop the water from going to Egypt. It's just being utilized more in Ethiopia for the electricity. But what does that mean? And Ethiopia will have the capacity not only to light up Ethiopia, but to sell electricity throughout Africa. And so that is part of the problem. And very interestingly, Sudan would have been a very great beneficiary of that, but things changed right now. And so the alliances have changed over there too. So that's also a factor that's being stabilized there. Donald Trump said, go bomb the dam. Remember, he said that over the phone. And the first thing that Senator Kunz asked when he went to Ethiopia is, don't fill up the dam. So sometimes I think, is it more about the dam, or is it because of the TPLF? And the other interesting thing about this dam was not built with Western dollars. It was built with Ethiopian dollars. So that in of itself is a big problem, I think. Yeah, so I just wanted to add that to that. The other thing is TPLF's billions of dollars, the people were on the point of starvation before TPLF left. 95,000 people were on the verge of hunger. So they did not invest in Tigray or their people. You know, so the Tigrayan people are also major sufferers from the TPLF because those are dictators. Dictatorships don't care about people, they care about themselves. So I just wanted to add that. Thank you.
You know, just coming back to something, Benga, one thing that I've seen and I've sort of been surprised is how often people will talk about African governments as sort of not being the legitimate leaders of their country. You know, and right now we see all the time in the media talking about Prime Minister Abiy saying, you know, sort of snidely, and the winner of the Peace Prize is now at war. And you know, how often we look, you know, the way that the West has talked about Isaias, and over again we see this as if legitimate leaders, you know, that you know, the African leaders don't deserve that kind of respect. And it's even popular sort of among African youth to talk about their, you know, oh, the terrible leadership. And I'm wondering how much that affects Africa's ability to work within the world. You know, if you come in as a leader and you're seen as not really legitimate, then how much can you really affect change?
So I think the question is what grants legitimacy to a leader? It's the people that gives legitimacy to the leader. So, and that's the reason why a lot of people feel that, yeah, a democratic system of government is very awesome, which makes a lot of sense. But also, it means that democracy means support by the majority, right? So I would, by that definition, assume that any leadership that has home support, regardless of whether you don't have international support, as long as you have that support of the people, that's what grants you legitimacy, because you actually only are needed to function effectively at home. So if you've been able to function at home, then that's fine. Yeah, so I think that is the people that grants confer legitimacy on their leader. So there is not that much that, say, the foreign governments would say that really have much of anything. Meaning that if particularly youths are saying a particular leader is not good or they don't like him, it's because they don't like him. It's not going to be because America said they don't like him. That kind of thing. I mean, a lot of Nigerians and a lot of Africans never supported. A lot of Nigerians in the diaspora, that is Nigerian at home, Nigerians that in Nigeria supported the Trump administration for reasons that are best known to them. Meanwhile, a lot of Nigerians here didn't support him. So you have all of that. It's not what foreign leaders say about a particular leader of the country that determines it. Eritreans at home knows who their leader is, right? Ethiopians know who their president is. But I think that one thing that foreign leadership or government should be mindful of is how much of an effort do they put in understanding histories? How do I need to understand the past in order for me to understand how the present even fits into the mix in the first place? I don't know how much of their time they commit to that, because the only way by which you can progress is to know how you got to where you are in the first place. You figure out how you got there. And I think I'm gonna encourage the American government to do that, because it's when you do that you come to the realization of, oh yeah, I can step in, or no, I don't have to step in, or I don't have to make any comment, or I just need a one headline or just one liner, and that's it. But most of our foreign leaders just bring in that old idea, the old narrative, the old bias, and then bring it into the current, and there is always a ripple effect. that affects lives. And these are the same people that come to say something funny about how people perish on the sea and how a particular country allows another people to leave. You know, here is a case of people needing help, but the help is not in you giving them loose change. The help is in you understanding them. Hear our story. That is the help that people need. Help is not I need a coin. No, it's about this is my story, this is my situation. If you understand this story, then it would inform your next step. But you don't just take the next step without having to hear the story, because it is always the narrative that should inform the next step. It's the experience that forms the narrative in the first place. I think that should be the sequence. And I think once that is done, maybe we'll just be about getting to do the right things.
Becca, that is so perfect. You know, people always ask me, what can I do for Africa? And you know, they want to donate or adopt a child kind of thing and all these things. And I always say, inform yourself, learn about it. Like, that's actually the thing that would help the most. So I think it's just beautifully put. Wasi, I'm going to come to you. We are almost out of time. I have a million more questions for everybody, but I've been told that we have to wrap things up. So Wasi, I'm going to come to you for looking towards the future. What do you think, again, as I asked Hassan, what is realistic and what do you hope will be the future?
Yeah, I mean, it is a very complex situation, what's happening in Ethiopia, and because of all the histories, especially of the last 27 years. But I think the African problems, African solutions. I think the US and the UN should really stay out of it so that we resolve this issue with the TPLF, which is a criminal organization right now. And they're not even there right now. I mean, they are, let us help build Tigray. Let us help build Ethiopia. Let us get rid of this ethnic federalism, which is keeping people divided. Let us work in harmony with Somalia, with Eritrea, so that I can go to Mazawa and lie on the beach also some point. So that is my wish. My wish is that we really come together and the West stay out of it. And if they do, just report what is really happening there. That's all. That's what I would say.
The last thing I would like to say first, thank you for this panel. I am so really delighted and I am so happy to be part of it. Secondly, as everybody mentioned, Africa has been suffering for so long. It did not have borders when Europeans came, and they created artificial borders and they left the problem behind. TPLF created a problem with the Horn of Africa, similar to the colonial. Actually, they just replicated the same strategy, and they divided every society in the Horn of Africa. So I'm encouraging the United States not to take a side, and just only we have to support the majority, and also we have to protect the rights of the people. But just keep in mind, somebody who left from the city and maybe her husband or her wife is, her husband or his wife are in, fighting. If they come to the refugee camp, they will tell you whatever they want. So you don't have to listen to everybody's story. This is normally, I used to interview, as I told you, some victims. So I don't want to say everybody is not a victim, but there's always exaggerations and some people make the stuff up. So we have to be very, very careful to look into the issue, and investigate thoroughly until we reach the conclusion. But I'm saying that we need really to support the people of Tigray to survive. And also, I'm very much concerned about the Eritrea itself, because they never enjoyed the independence they get from Ethiopia. They've been in war, and then they've been under the propaganda machine. And again, right now, the TPLF started, and somehow that it spills over to the United States foreign policy. So we have to be, look into that situation And it's an encouraging sign. The relationship between Somalia and Ethiopia and Eritrea, that's a hub. So that's the area, it needs to be empowered and fostered and welcome, not to listen a few individuals who want to, again, to steal $4 or $5 billion from the poor people and invest in the propaganda and the lobbying to foreign countries in order to abuse the local people.
Well, thank you so much. If I can say what my hopes for the future are, my hopes, Wasi, as you said, is that we can have this conversation on the beach of Massawa all together. Wouldn't that be lovely? I hope that you have enjoyed our talk today for Africa Talks. And I'm not sure that we have answered the question of the quest for reality-driven politics. I think we've actually brought up so many more questions, but it's been a fascinating discussion. I want to thank my panelists, Wasi Tesfa, who is an Ethiopian human rights advocate and social media advocate, and Hassan Omar, a Somali community leader and expert on the Horn of Africa politics, Michael Ralph, a professor at New York University, and Benga Desylva, who is a graduate lecturer at George Mason University. This has been a wonderful discussion. Thank you so much, everybody.
Thank you very much.
And thank you to Africa Talks for bringing us all together.